Hello, good evening, everybody. It's me, Dave Mane, from Gunjur Online. Today I'm here with a guest, Pa Louis Sambou. He's a young man, relatively young compared to me, obviously, who has been writing a lot about the draft constitution. Some start calling it the late draft constitution. I think he's quite a guy who's very coherent. I follow him and I learn a lot. So today we thought we could bring him to Gunjur Online and we can have a discussion. He can try and what he's been writing so far, which has been followed by so many people, both in the Gambia and the diaspora. He can probably try and elaborate on them. I mean, like I said, it's written as much as anyone has really on the back of this draft constitution. What we feel it very important and very urgent and necessary. We can have a conversation with him because there's been some misunderstandings. Obviously, some people uneasy. You can call it that because I spoke to some people and they are worried about the religious element to it. And I think his arguments were very spot on, and I think they were measured. And on that note, anyway, we'd like to welcome him. I don't know much about him. It's only the past few months I came across his writings, and I'm like, where's this guy been? This guy is really good. And then, but today he can come here. If he doesn't mind, he can introduce himself. Like us, he's also Gambian. I don't even know where in the Gambia he come from, which doesn't matter really at all in the grander scheme of things. But he's here, so he can provide us some more of that information. And then he can probably give us a background of who he is himself, and then we can take it from there. Mr. Sambou, we're very honored to have you here on Gunjur Online. This is new to me. I'm so you probably much more practiced than I am to this. Normally we will have a conversation here on Monday evenings, but it's about four of us. But today I'm just been it's me being thrown to the wolves really. So I think you'll bear with me, the two of us. I think we have a conversation as two brothers, and then we have our fellow Gambians listening and watching, and hopefully they'll interact with us, and then we just have a national conversation. Very well, we welcome you here, and then the floor is all yours now, Mr. Sambu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mane, for having me on your platform to discuss this very important issue, which is the draft constitution. Hopefully, by the time this program comes to an end, hopefully most of your listeners would have the opportunity to hear a completely opposite version of of what most people have been putting out online with regards to the issue of the draft constitution. Because obviously, I'm sure most people who have been following the subject would notice that for the most part, the conversation has been one-sided, which is for the most part on most of the platforms that I have been clearly following, that I have seen discussing the issue. For some reason, whether it was by design or whether it is something that just happened by default, usually they would only have people who agree with everything in the draft constitution. And what was missing was the opposite side. And hopefully, I hope that in this discussion today, we will, I'll do my best to try and put across that, that point of view. With regards to an introduction as to who I am, I come from Serekunda, and now I live in the East Midlands area of the United Kingdom. And the work that I do is I do tax litigation work, which is tax litigation work with the Revenue and Customs Authority here in the UK. And as somebody who has a very keen interest in matters of human rights and constitutional law, that is something that I've been doing also in my spare time. So and that was why a few years ago, I believe around 2017, myself and about 8 to 9 Gambians came together, and we started what is now known as the Democracy Watch Gambia, which is a civil society organization, and mainly what we focus on is issues of human rights and the preservation and enhancement of democracy in the Gambia.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's quite. I did hear about that. You what's it called? You want to call it NGO, civil society group. Yeah. I think it's a Professor saying part of that, isn't it? Ablai saying, yeah.
No, Professor Sen is not. Is not part of it now.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a good introduction. And obviously, this draft constitution. I mean, for me, I'm a layman in law, but even from a layman standpoint, I thought I didn't feel that a new constitution was necessary. That's just me. For me, I thought the Gambia had other priorities. The amount of money that was spent, and I could understand the symbolic value of us trying to set up a new constitution, draft a new constitution, because you can say probably we're trying to lay to rest the historic, what you can call the ghost of Yaya Jammeh. So people wanted to close a chapter and open a new chapter. So I think that's my feeling. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a trained lawyer, but this is just from my layman's perspective. And I thought, so what happened? This symbolic representation, we wanted to show people and the whole world, and even Gambians, and especially even Yajambe's own people in the Gambia, if you could say that we have closed that chapter, we're moving on. So we felt that there are people within the Gambia polity who felt that it's necessary for us to have to draft a new constitution. And even though I'm not a lawyer, I did not think it was necessary. I don't think it was money well spent. Yeah, because I think the institutional abuse that happened under Yahya Jammeh's watch, I think we can correct those. We can have corrective justice without having to go to having to draft a new constitution. I don't know. What's your take on that? Obviously, as a trained lawyer.
Yeah, with the issue of the constitution, I think for the most part, for myself, I have followed the process that led to the formation of the coalition in the Gambia in 2016. And throughout that process, right up to when the election results were called out, nobody was really talking about replacing the 1997 constitution.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the conversation was centered around reform. And reform does not necessarily mean you have to replace it. It means you just make it better. So this issue of having a completely new constitution was something that was introduced much later by our activist justice minister, the previous justice minister, Tambedu. He was the one that came up with the idea. So, which is why, for most people who kept saying, including the CRC, who kept saying that the people wanted a new constitution, and they kept saying that the coalition government, well, which is no longer a coalition, promised the people a new constitution, which is completely untrue. It is a false statement. They did not promise anybody a new constitution. What they promised people was reform. And that reform does not require a new constitution. Okay. Factually, I think that's one flaw in one of the reasons that people advance as to why we need a new constitution. That's the first one, and that clearly doesn't hold any water. Now let's move into the next one. Now let's look at the legality of having a new constitution. Because if one looks at the 1997 constitution, one would notice that the 1997 constitution does not allow for its repeal. It allows for its amendment. You can amend entrenched provisions, and provisions that are not entrenched, clearly they can be amended. But what is not available in the 1997 constitution is a provision which allows for it to be repealed. So clearly now we can see that factually there's no justification as to, in fact, politically, there's no justification as to why we should replace the 1997 constitution, and legally that gateway does not exist. Okay, so now when Bata Mbedu came up with this idea that we had to replace the 1990. I think Honorable Halifa Saleh raised some of the concerns that I had at the time on the floor of the House, and for me personally, I think the only way that the 1997 Constitution can be repealed would be, say, for instance, it would have to be a much longer and a much more cumbersome process, but for you to pursue something, regardless of whether the policy or the objective is morally right or not, that is not really the question. It has to be legally done properly. So for them to do that properly, they would first have to introduce a provision into the 1997 Constitution, a provision which would allow the 1997 Constitution to be repealed. And for that provision to be introduced, they would have to come with a bill to the National Assembly, and that bill will have to pass the National Assembly. Then it will go to a referendum. Then once that bill passes a referendum, then that repeal provision, that provision which would allow for the 1997 Constitution to be repealed, would form part and parcel of the 1997 Constitution. Then after that, you can repeal it. But unless and until that happens, well, they can pretend that they're doing everything by the book, but clearly they're not. And for me, that was one issue I had with the Constitution. But eventually, I moved on and thought, look, if at all we can have something that is better than the 1997 Constitution in the form of a draft Constitution which can pass the National Assembly and then which can pass a referendum, then I think that should be fine. But clearly, what we saw being presented to us was definitely wholly unacceptable in my humble opinion, and I have put out the reasons why I believe that to be the case. And by the end of this conversation, I would do my best to share some of those views with your listeners.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. I think we got somebody else has joined us, Mr. Dr. Sulayman Njie. So I think he can properly introduce himself. Mr. Njie, if you would like to just briefly introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm sorry. I'm just wrapping up work and whatnot. But yeah. So first of all, Palu, good seeing you, man. We go way back from Nyakwe School. School. We go way back since we were maybe 3 or 4 years old, But yeah, so I live in Washington, D.C. I'm an analyst with the United States Government Accountability Office, which is the research arm of Congress. So we do policy analysis and whatnot. So unlike Palui, I'm not a lawyer, but most of my work comes from the legislative branch. I work for the legislative branch, so I look at legislation and whatnot. And just a disclaimer, I'm not here on behalf of the U.S. federal government. I'm here in my own capacity. So anything I say here does not reflect any of my views as in my capacity as a federal government employee. But I also teach political science. I'm a political science professor at Bluefield State College in West Virginia. And I also teach at the UTG every now and then in the master's program there. Anyways, this is a my brief background. I don't know where, because I'm joining this conversation very late. But on my, do you want us to just, I can just go ahead and get into my take on the draft constitution, or, you're just, how does it work? How does the format work?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Actually, we just started not that long ago. Mr. Sambou just basically introduced himself, and then, I mean, he shared his views on the draft constitution. I mean, the whole process, and then the rationale that was given that the draft constitution was needed, and then what his view was then, and then eventually how he shifted his view. But then, as we all know, he's not very happy with the end result. So that's where we were really. So we actually just beginning. So yeah, you can just get into it straight away, please.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't prepare my notes well ahead of time because it's been a very crazy week for me. But yeah. So first of all, I have a problem with most of these commissions. I've been, I've written about this several times on just how they came up with these commissions and whatnot. And I feel like the commissions are kind of a cop out to face reality in and of itself, from the TRRC to perhaps I think the CRC is a little bit more warranted. But, that's just from a perspective as a political scientist, not as a lawyer, right? I'm not talking about legalists here. I'm just talking about how it was. I think the process was very, it was inclusive to a certain extent because a lot of people were involved in the process and the consultation. And I feel like we needed that in the Gambia. The whole people getting engaged, getting involved in the political process. And, I think sometimes people forget the essence of democracy. We just think democracy is just about voting. It's the process itself. Is the process itself. And democracy also, it requires an informed citizenry, right? You cannot just have people voting like we've been doing for the last 50 years, this cult of the individual, just voting for people, just for the hell of it, right? Because for some reason we like those people. I think democracy at some point should transcend, this, name recognition and whatnot, but involves the people themselves to be, to become stakeholders, right? And I think one of the things that was good about the commission was that it gave people that outlet to vet, to argue, to debate, right? That is democracy in action. For several weeks to a month, everybody was arguing about the secularism and whatnot, right? Most of our people never heard of the word secularism. For some reason, it became the bigger existence of the citizenry. That in and of itself is good for democracy. Think about it. 6 years ago, who would have even cared what was going on in the parliament? Jammeh could have literally come up with a new constitution if he wanted to. And it probably would have gone to a referendum. Nobody would even care that much. The fact that people are taking ownership of things is good. Right. Democracy, though, doesn't always yield you what you want. A lot of people are arguing that this is the end of democracy. And I think those people really have no idea what democracy is. We're just beginning. We're in the starting point at this point, right? And for some people, if this draft, the draft constitution has passed and gone on, we do a referendum and whatnot, that would have been a win for democracy. But no, that's not how democracy works. I feel like that is very myopic, right? Because democracy itself includes certain factions arguing for and against ideas and policies and laws. Right? Sometimes you get your way, sometimes you don't. But just because you don't get it your way doesn't mean that that is the end of the democratic process. And I think it's also foolhardy to think that politicians somehow, and that's where I have a problem with the commission, because I feel like we're assuming that politicians are some kind of altruistic people who are going to do this for the national interest. But the national interest itself is contested. It's a contested space. Every political party would argue, and I'm sure that about this, every politician would argue that their interest does not diverge anyway from the national interest. So let's take, for example, and both of you all are privy to some of the stuff, my conversations through the listserv and my ideas and what I think people are missing here. Because I feel like people have this assumption that somehow we only become democratic if we have all these altruistic leaders and politicians who put the national interest ahead of everybody. That's not what democracy is.
No.
Democracy means that everything is contested to a certain extent. Every single policy is contested, pro and against. If everybody agrees with everything, then what's the point of having a democratic system? We can just have a one-party system and just call it a day, right? But politicians, in essence, are there to defend and protect the interests of their party. And where I had a problem with the CRC, I feel like they didn't include a lot of political scientists in the commission. Because one of the mistakes they made is that they didn't realize that politicians would do whatever they have to do, anything to protect their own interests. Even if that means basically voting against a $2 million document, they would do it because at the end of the day, to politicians, winning is everything. Winning is the most important thing to politicians. Everything else we can debate it later. But they have to win, because if you don't win, you don't have a mandate. If you don't win, you're not a politician. You can just as well as just become a whatever you want to call it. You can create your own NGO or whatever and start advocating for other things. Because you have to win to be able to actually put your ideas to the test. If you don't win, and I think most politicians understand this, right? And if they think Barrow would have actually accepted some of the provisions in the Constitution I mean, they probably thought that for some reason this guy was beyond politics. I mean, he is a politician. He's a politician, rather, after all, and he had to do what he had to do to win. And this would have blunted or stunted or limited his capacity, his route to victory. And I don't see how, if President Barrow would have, supported this. Granted, I feel like they had the opportunity to make some changes before we even put it to a referendum, and I feel like the Gambian people deserve a referendum on this, at least at the barest minimum, given the input of the people and whatnot. But again, just because people voted against this doesn't mean that the other side were actually they're the ones who are supporting the national interest. We have to be very careful because we are getting to a position where you're either with us or you're against us. And we're looking at this constitution as kind of a holy grail or something that is the end all be all. No, actually, it's not. It's not. I mean, literally what Halifa said we literally could have just amended the crap out of this 97 constitution and just call it a day. Really, right? But for me, though, my take is that the process, if we can have this kind of commission for free every year, I'm good with it, right? Because people get engaged. It's good. It's really, really good to have a society where people are taking ownership. I mean, think about it. 10 years ago, who would have called a representative telling them to vote for or against anything in the parliament? No one. I mean, really, that wouldn't have happened. But from a political science point of view, you look at this, you're like, wow, this is progress, right? Mm-hmm. But then you understand political behavior. You understand how politicians behave. Mm-hmm. And again, the idea that politicians somehow are going to vote for a national interest, then who even defines what national interest is? Who even defines that, right? I mean, there are a lot of factions in the Gambia that oppose actually this draft constitution because it goes against their own interests. Yeah. Well, that doesn't mean that those people are against the national interest because they see the national interest basically as the same as their own interest. And especially minority groups, they have to protect themselves. And if they don't have that protection from the main, from the national government, in a draft constitution, because, especially when we're discussing secularism and stuff, you realize that Gambia is actually a very radical society. Mm-hmm. You realize how far right Gambia is. Gambia is not as progressive as we think it is. But even those conversations are good. They're healthy. So I can ramble on and on and on, but I'm just going to stop here and then I'll let Louis chime in, and then we can go on with the conversation. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Sulayman. I think you're very right. That's why it's good to have a perspective like yours, one of yours who is a political scientist, and also somebody who is in the corridors of power in the United States. Because whether we like it or not, our people every now and again they try to do some comparison, even just historical comparison between the American Constitution and the Gambian Constitution. I think everybody seems to hold the American Constitution as the very pinnacle. I think I've got my own views on that, but that's one other day. but yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. I'm sure you had what Mr. Njie said. Like me, he's not trained. He's not a trained lawyer. So our insights, for me, as you can say, is what we call social technologist. Somebody who's got background in, you can say, IT, also retrained as a social scientist. I am coming. My views are more like you can call it sociologist anyway. But your perspective is more from the legal side, and which I think is quite important here, because mine is just social commentary, if you want to call it that. But when it goes to the nitty-gritty of the law, what is in the Constitution, it goes above my head a little bit. And then I'm not embarrassed to admit that at all. But like Dr. Njie said, I think it's important we have the conversation going. In anything at all in the Gambia, we come to a stage whereby we need to have conversations, whether difficult or easy, but we need to have national discourse about a whole raft of issues in that country. Because the 22 years of Jammeh, it's been psychologically very detrimental to our people. So, like I said, you can look at the symbolism of having this CRC, because like I said, I made it very clear. I don't think that the Gambia at that time should be spending that amount of money doing this constitutional review, how much it costs. But listening to you and then even listening to Dr. Njie, obviously there's value in it, because it's like, how do you want to call it? participatory, you want to call it that. The vast amount of the Gambia, even you can say, well, it's not the vast amount, but you could say they travel the whole length and breadth of the country, going to little communities and trying to speak to them. Even I think for some of them, this whole constitution is above their head. No disrespect to them, but I mean we can take it for the symbolic value represented, and I think that's quite important. People owning, having a say in how their country is governed. I think, like I said, we're trying to close a chapter, open a new chapter because of AI Jame. So within this process, I think you could say there are things could have been done a little bit differently. Some, I could say, but there you go, Mr. Sambou, and also like Dr. Njie said, you could say politics is all about winning. That's what it is. And I think people kind of forget that. Yes, Barrow might not be the most astute politician, but he knows how to win and he would like to win. And the same thing goes for people who are in his party. His what we call in the UK, on his side of the house. So that's where he is. So he's not naive. And what is importantly, as Dr. Njie also said, the conversation needs to keep going. We need to keep this national conversation going, and people need to be wise enough. People need to be adult enough. People need to be politically astute and mature enough to know that let's not take this personally. There are people who got reservations, and they have a reason to have reservations, and we need to listen to them. And I think their reasons are very valid. And when it comes to draft constitution myself, there's so many parts of it which I didn't agree with. But like I said, this is more about somebody coming from a legal side, with his legal perspective, with his legal training, to try and shed more light on the whole constitution. So the floor is yours, Mr. Sambou. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, and Saul, Dr. Njie. Thank you very much. Just to say, myself and Dr. Njie, we went to the same nursery school, and I believe the same primary school, and from then all the way to St. Augustine's
High school, yeah.
Yeah. So we know each other very well.
We're from the same neighborhood too. We grew up in the same neighborhood.
Exactly.
Wow.
And your dad was my nursery school teacher too, Uncle Pa Sambou.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you guys go way back.
Oh, we go way back. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. Clearly, I think Dr. Njie raised this issue, and Dave, you also raised it as well. That the people who were in charge of the process lost sight of the importance of the politics that was involved in the process, because somehow I think they must have thought that they could blackmail the politicians with, oh, what is in the draft is the will of the people. Clearly, I'm sure if there's any group of people or any group of interested parties who has a much better understanding of what the will of the people is, I think it's the politicians. So I think if there's anything that the drafters and other people who are supporting them would learn from this process, I think that's something that they would take away from what had happened. Because I don't even believe that this claim that everything in the draft constitution is the will of the people, I don't believe that is true. Let's just test that a little bit. When it comes to, I just start with the issue of birthright citizenship. Over 70% of everybody that the CRC consulted, Gambians that is, clearly said that they wanted to have it in the constitution that everybody born in the Gambia, regardless of the nationality of your parents, that person should be a Gambian. But somehow that did not make it to the draft constitution. That's one issue. And then we move on to the next one, which is the issue of the term limit. If one looks at the CRC report, it's in paragraph 363 up to 366. That's the aspect of the report which covers the issue of the term limit. Clearly, there was overwhelming support. Over 90% of Gambians agreed that we should have a presidential term limit, which I agree with. Personally, I have not spoken to anybody who doesn't agree with that position. But where the problem comes in now is whether such a term limit or such a provision should be progressive or it should be retroactive. The CRC claims that it is the will of the people that that provision should be retroactive. It means it should start from the current term as opposed to starting from the date that the Constitution comes into force. That is what the CRC says. But I have looked at their report, and this is the specific aspect of the report which deals with this issue, paragraphs 363 to 366. There's nothing there to support the position that the people actually want the term limit to be retroactive. And in addition to that as well, if one looks at their report, at paragraph 353 to 355, over 71% of Gambians told the CRC that they wanted the draft to have an upper age limit for the presidency. But that was not put in the draft constitution. Then, you see, then the question must really be asked. Then to what extent is the substance in the draft constitution the will of the people? You know, it's something that is very it's a very questionable claim to make, that that the substance of the draft is the will of the people, when time and time again people have asked for something but the drafters have drafted something else. And then one thing that worries me the most, the part that worries me the most about this whole issue of the draft constitution is the issue of human rights, fundamental human rights. Because I know a lot of people focus on this issue of the word secular, whether secular should be in the constitution or it should not be in the constitution. Okay. For me personally, legally speaking, I don't think it makes any difference whether the word secular is there or not. It doesn't make any difference legally. What is important is the actual substance of the draft. So for me, I focus more on the substance than on the issue of whether that word is there or not. So the draft constitution in the form that the draft was in at the time that it was voted down, even if the drafters put in the word secular, it would not make it any more secular, because that draft constitution was clearly not a secular document. Because for something to be secular, clearly there has to be a clear separation of state and religion, and clearly there was too much of religious issues covered in that draft to make it not secular, even if the word secular was put in there. But for me personally, that is not a concern, because I see the draft constitution, or I see a constitution, as a national document. And what should go in the national document is what people want to be there. If people want religion to be there, that's fine. But for me personally, my view is, if at all one is going to accommodate the views of a particular section of society, that is fine. But you have to accommodate such a view in such a way that that view being accommodated in the draft would not detriment another group to the extent that they suffer detriment to the point that their fundamental human rights would be breached. And what do I mean by this? Is this. The 1997 Constitution, clearly we have the carry codes in the 1997 Constitution. And section 137, subsection 4 of the 1997 Constitution is very clear. It states it in no uncertain terms that the Sharia or the carry courts will only have jurisdiction over Muslims, and they would not have jurisdictions over individuals who are not Muslims. And now let's see what the draft constitution tried to do. If we look at the draft constitution and look at the provision that deals with the issue of the jurisdiction of the Sharia, which is draft section 188 subsection 1, one can notice that the goalpost was shifted. Under the 1997 Constitution, the legal test to determine the jurisdiction of the carry courts was whether the parties that are involved are Muslims. If the answer to that question is yes, then the carry courts will have jurisdiction. If the answer is no, then clearly the Qadi courts will not have jurisdiction. And that means even if one of the parties, is a non-Muslim, then the Qadi courts will not have jurisdiction. Now we come to the draft constitution. The draft constitution shifted the goalpost. Instead of the legal test being whether all the parties are Muslims, the legal test was changed in the draft so that the legal test would be whether the wealth or the issue that the court is supposed to determine belongs to a Muslim. And that is an issue. Because say, for instance, if you have a Muslim man who's married to a non-Muslim woman, then clearly, when it comes to determine the inheritance of that Muslim man's estate, then the non-Muslim wife would be subjected to Sharia, and that is not right. And even though the drafters they clearly know that a situation like this could arise as a result of them changing the goalposts. If one looks at their report, you look at paragraph 477 of their report. That paragraph states that under the draft constitution, Sharia will only apply to Muslims. And on the basis of what I have just explained and what the reality is, that is not true. And for me, that is the most concerning part, because they were prepared to kind of deceive the public into believing one thing in a document that is not legally binding, which is their report. Whereas in the draft constitution, which is legally binding, they have something which was the quite opposite. So for me, really, I don't think I do not intend to suggest bad faith or anything on the part of the commissioners, but I think some of the things that they have done, I am sure if they were given the opportunity to do everything all over again, I'm sure they would do some of those things quite differently, because clearly you cannot be put in such an important position to draft a national document such as a constitution, and you start giving the public the impression that you are more interested in serving the interests and the wishes of one aspect of society as opposed to the national interest. So for me, really, that was my biggest concern was human rights. And it does not just stop at that. Because if we look at the 1997 Constitution, for example, there is no provision whatsoever in the 1997 Constitution which allows for anybody to suffer any detriment as a result of their religious belief. Now, if we look at the draft constitution, you look at section 49, subsection 3. It states, I don't have the provision right in front of me, but I will just paraphrase. What it says is a citizen may not be denied employment or an access to an institution and so forth on the basis of their religious belief. Now, just bear in mind the word may. Legally, whenever you use the word may, it means it gives the person who's exercising that authority discretion. What should be there? It should be shall. It means it is legally mandated that this type of conduct would not be lawful. But if you use the word may, with the word may, for instance, in the light of giving, by virtue of that provision, section 49, subsection 3, if the draft constitution passed and Mr. A went to PMO to apply for a job, and Mr. B does not like Mr. A's religion, Mr. B can deny Mr. A employment on the basis of that. And yes, Mr. A can go to court, but legally, under the Constitution, which is that provision, section 49, subsection 3, Mr. B's actions would not be lawful, would not be unlawful. And these are some of the problems which people like me have been trying to point out to these people who are supporting the draft constitution. That look, we all agree that there are problems with the 1997 constitution, but we have to make sure that whilst we are trying to address those problems, we do not create more problems. We have to address the problems of the 1997 Constitution swiftly, yes, but it has to be done safely. And these are these are just a few of the problems, not all. I think if I have to go through every single human rights problem in that draft, I think we're going to be here for a week. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. It's important because I also reading. You did a very, very brilliant job where you're doing winners and losers. I think was absolutely fantastic. And then I was going through it, and then one of the fundamental human rights. Then you just wrote that section 22(2), whereby that's the protection from deprivation of property. And this is obviously 1997 Constitution, but it seems to be missing in the draft Constitution, which I thought is as somebody who is a native Kombonka, we have a lot of land issues. That's another topic anyway. So this was, I mean, we all, just like politicians, even us, the layman, we also have self-interest. So that was quite something that I just looked at it. I'm like, okay, that's very interesting. So just basically to bring the point that we all got self-interest. That's just human nature. So nobody is above self-interest. It's just a matter of trying to find a balance whereby you don't become too selfish, but we all got self-interest. Just for that, I could just add to that really. Dr. Njie, I think if you would like to chip in, please, from what the very wonderful contributions that Mr. Sambou just made.
No, I mean, I don't think I can top that. And he talked about different things that some of them I think I just wanted to touch on a little bit, especially on the religion aspect. I think one of the things the drafters were thinking, I think, was to avoid controversial issues. And when I say controversial, things that are going to hurt the feelings of the majority, right? Because the majority, obviously, we know who are, there's Muslims in the Gambia. So one of the things they were trying to do is to kind of pander to a certain extent to the majority. So that, because remember when the secularism stuff came up, I mean, all the imams were talking about this. There was no way they're going to pass a draft constitution. There was no referendum that was going to happen with a draft constitution with secularism in it. We all know it. And people who didn't even care about it, all of a sudden decided, oh yeah, this is the end of it. The gays and all this stuff, all those people are coming, right? Because they don't understand the implications of these. So what they get is like secondhand information and all that stuff. But the drafters, I feel like this is one of the things they had in mind. Because to them too, they need to win. And to them, winning means a draft passing the parliament and the majority of the people, basically voting for this in a plebiscite, right? And I think the other things like Birthright, again, there's sections of Gambians, even though there was a poll, there's sections of Gambians who are hard-right nationalists. And I mean like hardcore nationalists. We see them online all the time. And these people are very, very active online. The moment they put that birthright stuff in the constitution, it's going to become the same thing as secularism. It's not even going to be any different because people don't even understand the implications of it yet. But the moment people start going online talking about this, right? Literally, it's going to turn into some super nationalistic stuff to where, it's just going to derail everything. So I think one of the things they were doing as well, and I'm not here to defend them, but as drafters, you pass some of the buck to the parliament to add stuff, to tweak stuff, because they had the right to do that, right? So I think one of their biggest mistakes was not tackling some of the major issues head on. Instead, I feel like they kind of like, I don't know, they flail a little bit instead of going for it. But again, that's not their job to an extent. Their job is to present a draft to the parliament, and it was up to the parliament to tweak it and make the document whole, right? Because again, you cannot have a holistic document. No way. It doesn't exist anywhere. But again, in every single legislation, again, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And in this case, it seems like the commission are one of the losers. I'm not sure if the Gambian people are actually losers. And that's where I'm always pushing for this. Because at the end of the day, we have a Western system of government that our people really do not understand. So when you have this kind of initiatives, involving people, incorporating people, getting their ideas is good. The other issue you face is that you face the issue of groupthink. Again, go back to secularism, right? So somebody, all of a sudden, somebody smart enough went online and just created this crazy stuff about secularism, and it just became the bane of existence of the citizenry. Even though we talk about it for a while, but I feel like it's also very dangerous, right? When you have few people kind of driving the narrative, instead of actually having everybody chip in and understand really what secularism means, it becomes this groupthink stuff, right? And again, democracy itself is the tyranny of the majority. Democracy doesn't guarantee liberty, and I think people have confused that a lot. Democracy is a tyranny of the majority, and if you give the majority Gambians to choose about Syria courts and stuff, trust me, Gambia is a very right-wing country. We are bigoted. We are really soft bigoted, right? And I wrote an article on this like 3 years ago or 2 years ago called "Tyranny of the Majority." People started attacking me. I was like, the day the Christian minorities in the Gambia start asking for a church in their state house, that's when this whole Gambian tolerance stuff is. That'll be the end of it. Because again, we're not even honest enough to actually have these conversations. So I think the draft constitution actually kind of brought this to the fore. To some of the people who thought that they live in this fantasy land, to realize that no, actually you do not. The majority controls this country, and it's the majority's whim that's going to actually define this country, not the minority. And again, that's democracy, is the tyranny of the majority. The minority, until and unless they're protected within a constitution. And I think that's where the drafters also kind of, like Paul Louis mentioned, the drafters could have launched, they could have been a little bit bold, right? Kind of like, and put some of these words, kind of embed them a little bit. Let's not even talk about it, right? Let's just move on, right? But instead, that became like the topic of conversation. There was no way they were gonna add some of these things, because again, we have to understand, even this birthright stuff, governments are far right. We're only liberal when we come to America and Britain and whatever, because obviously we're a minority. Once we're in the Gambia, we are as hard right as they come. And when you put this to the test, if the draft would have, if secularism was put in the constitution, if birthright was put in the constitution, trust me, I don't think this would have even got to where, that would have been probably the end of it, right? But there are other things I also want to talk about, just a little bit, just to, touch on this a little bit, because I feel like sometimes, like you mentioned, we try to compare the two, American Constitution and the Gambian Constitution. Constitutions themselves are not the answer to all of our problems. No. So even with the drafting of the Constitution, the framers themselves, they made that argument that they're drafting the Constitution not for posterity, but for their generation. Jefferson actually would argue all the time that every generation should have their own Constitution. Right? At some point, he was making those arguments, right? That's why they put the corrections in the Constitution, the amendments, so that we can amend them, kind of fix them to fit our reality. Because every generation is different, right? But the American Constitution itself is a living document. They've amended it, 27 times? So even if it's a living document, we could have learned something from it and understand that we already have a document, the 97 document, that was amended 50-something times. Let's change those parameters and make the document a little bit more progressive. Because when you look at this new constitution, this draft constitution, I really don't think it was that progressive at all. You cannot call it a progressive document. Was it a document that was trying to appeal to the whims of the majority? I would say yes. Yes. But you cannot say that this document was a progressive document in our time, right? 70 years ago, it would have been. Not today, not in our time. Because there are many things within this constitution. A lot of people are actually excluded. Guinea, they're going to vote in 2 days. You're going to have Guineans going to the Gambian embassy to vote there. The diaspora, where do we even fit? We account for 32% of the Gambia's GDP. Think about it. If any corporation or any entity in any world is responsible for almost quarter of the country's GDP, that corporation would not be excluded in the national say, right? But the fact that even that Gambians are excluded, Gambians overseas are excluded from it, in and of itself is problematic. Right? So, but again, I feel like what the drafters were doing too was to punt, give some of it to the parliament to decide. And again, I think that's kind of appropriate to a certain extent. I would have liked for them to be a little bit bolder, but they didn't want to kill the document either. They want to win. And for them, winning means actually getting this across the goal line. But they forgot to understand that they were dealing with politicians. Politicians have to win too.
Yeah.
And I don't know any politician that will vote to actually end their political career. I really don't.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. We tried to make it interactive. I think with somebody had a somebody made a comment. I don't know if that's for, let's see if we can share it. Oh, sorry. Here, Sanaba Charm. I think that's probably for the lawyer. I think that's for Mr. Sambou. If you believe in the rule of law, why do you think a treasonous guy who took it upon himself to ban the legitimate constitution of the nation could be a right instrument for the Gambia? It don't make sense, brother. Law has to be legitimate. Otherwise, where's legality? Anyone see it fit to stage coup and change constitution? Batambedu, your so-called activist AG, had served us very faithfully. Thank you very much. I know the question is for you anyway, but these are just people's views. It's okay. Yeah. So I think sometimes they make it a little bit personal, which is not necessary. But there you go. We are all enough. We are big enough. We are mature enough to take it on board. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I have a thick skin. Trust me, I have heard a lot worse than that. So, yes, just to address this this comment, I know a lot of people try to make this false equivalence between what Jammeh did in 1994 and what Batambedu clearly tried to do by overthrowing the 1997 constitution unlawfully. So we cannot compare the two, because what happened in 1994 was illegal. Just in case this listener does not, or this guy does not understand my position. Yeah. What happened on the 22nd of July 1994 was illegal. It was unlawful. I don't agree with it. But we are trying to do things properly now. So you cannot be saying that, yes, what Jammeh did was unlawful, but yes, we can do the same thing, but not using the barrel of the gun, but we can use lawyers to do exactly what Jammeh did, and it would be right. It wouldn't. So what I am saying is, let's do things properly, lawfully, and legally. That's all I'm saying. So with regards to Batambedu serving the Gambia well or not, I think that's a matter of subjective opinion, which I'm sure every Gambian has their own. So I'll just leave that one at that.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. I think which just takes us to basically you can say the next stage of the conversation, which is going to be transitional justice, because we saw from the the lawyers, how do you call them, the Bar Association from the Gambia. I think they released a statement saying that I'm going to quote: "Rejection of the bill will have a serious ramifications on the ongoing transitional justice process and legal reforms essential to strengthening the rule of law and our nascent democracy after 22 years of dictatorship." Obviously, as a trained lawyer, that you can probably provide a much better response, which is going to be more legalese. But from my own perspective as a lay person, I think Mr. Dr. Njie touched on it here. I think constitution could be changed. They could be amended, whatever term you want to use for. So it goes back to my very, very first point when we started the conversation, that I, as a layman, I didn't feel that it was necessary the amount of money that was spent to go through the draft constitution. After the constitution, 1997 constitution, doesn't matter who it was, Jammeh, whoever was, it doesn't matter at all. We could have just amended it or whatever you want to call it and move on. I think that's what constitutions are for. Again, I think the constitution is just a framework document countries have to use to govern themselves. I think that's what it is. So you're not going to have a constitution that's going to be applicable to everybody and every generation and every society. So it is changing. Just like we evolve, our constitutions change. But I felt that with the Jammeh, we came to a stage whereby I think it's a trauma, the 22 years of trauma. We wanted to close a chapter and open a new chapter. So I think within this process, we got too involved in symbolism. I think the symbolic value become much more important than sometimes what the substance of what we were trying to get engaged in was. This is my personal opinion. So I made that very clear. Also, obviously, Mr. Njie touched on being in the diaspora, contributing a lot. And I can't even take part in the elections. But we just wanted to move on to this transitional justice people's opinion, like their feeling, their fear that this draft constitution not going to parliament passing means that it's a threat to transitional justice. I don't buy it, but then again, like I said, you're the lawyer. You can give us your legalistic view on it. We'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Dave. I came across the statement that the Gambia Bar Association released, which I think was good because I think it's good for institutions like the Bar Association and other pressure groups, which are professional bodies, which constitute professionally qualified individuals. I think it is good for them to be putting the pressure on some of these things that they feel are happening, and in their view, whether we agree with them or not. But I think it's important for these things to be coming out. But I have to say I don't agree with their statement. For the simple reason is, for a start, they have not given any explanation as to why the voting down of the draft constitution is going to hamper transitional justice. I have not seen any reasoning. It's just a statement that they put out there. Is just one of those things. It's very similar to what most people were saying with the draft constitution. Oh, it's progressive. And whenever I ask them what makes it progressive, then there's a silence, and suddenly there's no response. So I think it's it's um, it's it's an empty statement, which is, or it's a statement which is not backed up by anything to qualify it. But I think what they may be hinting towards, this is just my assumption, what they may be hinting towards is maybe to do with the fact that in the 1997 Constitution, I believe it's section 232, I think, there are some schedules in that section, and some of those schedules have immunities which protect certain individuals, which is the AFPRC junta and other people who did things on their behalf or under their command or in compliance with their orders between 1994, July 1994, and up to the date that constitutional democracy was restored in the Gambia, which is 25th of January 1997. So I think that is what they may be alluding to. That because obviously with the 1997 constitution still in force, if at all there's any offense that happened within that time frame or within that period, then clearly certain individuals would seek to rely on this immunity to try and prevent prosecution. Clearly, a good example would be the case of Yankuba Ture. But this argument is flawed. It's a flawed argument, and I'll tell you why. Because the same individuals who are saying that unless and until we replace the 1997 Constitution, we cannot prosecute these crimes that are indemnified or that whose perpetrators or culprits enjoy immunity under this 1997 Constitution. The same people who are saying that this immunity exists are the same people who are saying that Yankuba Ture does not have immunity, so he can be prosecuted. Because you cannot at the same time claim that a member of the AFPRC junta does not have immunity, in which case, yes, we can prosecute him, whilst at the same time arguing that we have to replace the document, otherwise it gives immunity to the AFPRC. So it has to be one or the other, it cannot be both. So for me personally, I know that in the 1997 Constitution, in this actual section, it states it, I think, on Schedule 2, Paragraph 17, if I can recall. It states that these immunities cannot be repealed by the National Assembly. But I don't think that has any legal basis whatsoever. Because the reason is because if we look at the 1997 Constitution, there is only one provision in the 1997 Constitution which kind of restricts the legislative authority of the National Assembly. which is Section 100. If you look at Section 100, to be specific, Section 100, subsection 2, it specifies certain issues which the National Assembly is not allowed to exercise any legislative authority over. And one of them would be to declare a one-party state, or to declare the Gambia or to pass a law to introduce a state religion, and there are others. And this is the only provision that legitimately, lawfully, and that can constitutionally be used to bind the legislative hand of the National Assembly. Any other provision that does not, that seeks to do the same thing would not be valid. And if we look at Section 332, which is, I think, at Schedule 2, Paragraph 17, what it tries to do is to bind the legislative hand of the National Assembly, to say that the National Assembly cannot revoke those immunities. But unfortunately, those immunities are not entrenched. And none of those immunities form part and parcel of the issues that are mentioned in Section 100, being the issues which the National Assembly can never legislate over. So because of that, I think that prohibition that the National Assembly cannot repeal or amend those immunity clauses is just, it doesn't have any force of law in my view. So I don't agree with the Bar Association clearly that the failure of the draft constitution to pass hampers transitional justice. One more reason why I don't agree with them is that most of the offenses that the TRRC is investigating would be offenses that would be offenses under international law. And even if at all their argument is, yes, these immunities are valid and the National Assembly cannot do anything to repeal them, we still have international law. The Gambia has an obligation under international law to make sure that wherever those laws are breached, they have a legal obligation to make sure that they enforce whatever it is that is necessary. So clearly, under international law, every single issue that the TRRC is investigating, if at all there's evidence and we can establish that that evidence can link to a particular offense that can be pursued under international law, then that can happen. So I don't think that the failure of the draft constitution takes anything away from transitional justice, nothing at all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. Dr. Njie, before we chip in, I just thought, in my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, I mean, the legislators, the guys making our law in parliament. So whatever is in the constitution, let's say the 1997 constitution, which, like you said, people like, if we use Yankuba Toure as an example, people, they can argue that he can be prosecuted. But if we have members in parliament, or they call it National Assembly in the Gambia, the whole constitution is not set in stone. So you cannot just argue to me that, oh yeah, Jammeh said this certain provision in the constitution, it can never be changed. I do not buy this. I'm not a lawyer, but I do not buy that. So I think whatever has been in the constitution before, another set of parliamentarians or National Assembly members could repeal it. They could change it. They could amend it. So I do not think at all that this draft constitution not making it true making it true to law, or passing it, or actually giving it to the Gambians to actually to take it to a referendum. I don't think, like you, I don't think it affects the transitional justice system at all. That's just my belief, really. Dr. Njie, if you want to chip in, please. I just thought I'll say that briefly.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, like I said, the Constitution is a living document, right? So if they don't agree with it at this point, with what the drafters, I mean, with what the fact that we voted down the draft constitution in the Gambia. Well, what are the alternatives? What are we going to do? Right? To me, the alternative is very simple: go back to the parliament, let them repeal it. Simple. So instead of going through this whole iteration of, this is the end of transitional justice or whatever, I feel like we've been alarmists, right? We could literally repeal this. And I actually think this is good for judicial precedents, right? It can go to the Supreme Court and we see what it is, right? And the Supreme Court finally would have to decide, right, whether they are actually above the law or not. And if they are, well, then, we take this up to the international courts, whatever that is, right? Because the Gambian Constitution is drafted. I mean, it's supported by the Gambian people. Well, our representatives in Parliament are there to represent us. They're there to represent our interests or whatever that is, right? So the Parliament can simply change this. They really can. And then we see where the chips, the chips fall wherever they may. But that is the next step. But I want to also get back into the political aspect of this, right? Is this even in the interest of the Barrow government at this point? Is it even in their interest to prosecute these APRC people? I really don't think so. Yeah. Well, you could prosecute them, granted, yeah. If they show their loyalty to Barrow, what's going to happen next? You could just give them immunity, like we did with when they first sent out the TRRC. I mean, whatever, not the TRRC, the Johnny Commission. They omitted some people from whatever white people, whatever the hell they wrote, right? Because again, that serves their interests, right? It's selective justice. Justice in and of itself, it's selective, right? And any piece of legislation, all laws to a certain extent are exclusionary and discriminatory. All of them, because somebody's going to be hurt. Somebody's going to be excluded in the process somehow, right? In this case, the minority, the super minority, whereas the FPRC people, are the ones benefited from this kind of entrenched law, right? This is not in the interest of the nation. And that can be, that's probably the best argument we can make at this point, right? Having selective few people, being defended in a constitution. I mean, that in and of itself is insane. But the Gambian people supported it. Right? But again, the referendum in '96 was very different from, what we're used to today. But granted, the Gambian people still supported it. But again, easily, if the parliament is serious about this, if the people that voted for the constitution, for the draft constitution, their argument is that, some people are going to get away with it. Okay, granted, just change the thing. I mean, it's not rocket science. Just change it. Just change it. But again, the other thing is that we have this kind of marriage, what you're seeing now between Barrow and his, and the FPRC people, right? Barrow could easily give them immunity if push comes to shove. And we've also seen that the Gambian people are very good at actually forgiving criminals, right? I mean, just last year we saw them on TV, people like talking about all this TRRC with Edward and Sana. I was like, these people are insane. They're totally out of their minds. People think that was justice. Like, for some reason, we should just move on. Oh my God, these are good. I'm like, you're out of your minds. I mean, these are murderers, But for some reason, that's Gambia now, right? The fact that this is what we're pushing for, when you have people like Edward coming into the Gambia and nothing is going to happen, and all of a sudden they have this kumbaya moment. You have two criminals having a kumbaya moment, and all of a sudden, we should move on. I mean, then what's the point of actually arguing that the transitional justice, because of the entrenched laws, is going to stop transitional justice? I mean, the president can just omit anybody's name whenever he wants to, with all these unnecessary commissions to begin with.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll just keep it quickly because it's quite interesting when you mentioned Edward. I was in the Gambia last year, October, November. I was home when Edward was in TRRC. I was astounded. I was sad. I remember calling somebody in England and saying, I don't believe what I'm seeing in the Gambia. People were happy the way this guy was speaking. They thought he was a brave man coming there. I was like, what? Are you guys mad? Really, I had to phone people in England and say, I don't believe this. I'm in the Gambia. I'm in a car. I'm driving from Bigelow to go to my mom in Bruford. Everybody's on the street, basically happy. And it was shocking to me that Edward is coming there and he's going into this store and fro with what's this guy's name? Fall.
Fall, yeah.
And the arguments were so stupid sometimes. They like, oh, he spoke better English than Fall. I was like, what? I just couldn't believe it. It's like, oh, Fall thinks he speaks English, but this guy speaks better English than him. I'm like, oh my goodness. But anyway,
I don't want to talk about, but I wrote about this, right? That these commissions, especially the ones that are televised, I mean, they're just soap operas, right? Yeah. What are we even getting out of it? Really? With the TRRC, really, what's the point of it at this point? Really? What's the point of having a Justice Department? You know the criminals. Charge them. Why do we need a commission for it? I mean, it's not like this is Rwanda or something. You know, obviously you know who the criminals are. I mean, that's why we have a Justice Department. We don't need a commission to write a document that's going to go to the president. He's going to omit his best friend's name out of it, and then what? What's the whole point of it? I mean, really, it's just for show at this point. It's just the symbolism of it. And I think the reverse, what's even happening is like you have people like Edward now who have touched the hearts of the Gambian people like Sana Sabali, right? Even though Sana was a victim. But Sana was also a criminal. Being a victim doesn't make you a good person. It just means that you're a victim.
Yeah.
Because one day you could be the victim, the next day you could be the perpetrator, you could be the, you could be the oppressor, right? So the fact that we have these people already in a court of public opinion, they're already forgiven. What's the whole point of this?
Yeah.
What's the whole point of it? Because again, I think this is what happens when you have crimes that are committed in the name of the state. What you have is that the state is incapable of prosecuting itself. So what it does is actually push things to the margins. They don't want to talk about it. We talk about Faraba. They don't want to talk about it. They just set up commissions for everything. Because again, if you set up a commission, you don't have to face the crime itself, right? You just put it to the margins, and then later you're like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, right? By then, I mean, because people don't have the stamina to pursue justice. We really don't. It's just human nature. We don't have the stamina to pursue justice. So what we do, you just put things to the margins, create a stupid commission, and then everybody's on TV talking about who speaks a better language or whatever. You have people, making fun of other people, and we think for some reason that's a good thing. I really don't think that this Janet Commission, the TRRC, nothing is going to come out. I mean, really, it was just total waste of money. I mean, compared to the CRC, at least there was a process of incorporating the ideas of the people, engaging the people. It was more of a civic, I think it was a civic thing, and we needed this kind of civic engagement. But the TRRCs, I mean, it's good for TV, but I quit watching because, I mean, the moment that they invited that afternoon, I was coming actually from work, they invited Sana Sabali and what's his name, and Edward to hop. I was like, that is it, I'm done. These people are not serious. I mean, that was a joke.
I was in the Gambia, so you can imagine. I just wanted to come back to England. Really, it's really bad. Well, anyway, Mr. Sambou, if you, we just if you want to chip in, So there you go. I think if we have any problems, any concerns about transitional justice not actually happening, I think those are genuine concerns. Where Gambians can be, we are so forgiving. Let's move on. Let's forgive. It's we're all one family. And some of the arguments I had there about this, I mean, it was shocking to me, really. I'm like, really, honestly. So it became so small. So the gross, the horrible things this man did, and I mean, he was come on, this guy did some horrendous things to Gambians. All of a sudden, it's like it became a hero because of the English he spoke. It was beyond me. Thank you, Mr. Sambou. The floor is yours.
Yes, for me, the issue with the TRRC, I think the problem started. I think the people that are actually running the show, they should bear some responsibility as well. But I think the buck really stops with the National Assembly and Batambiri, because if you look at the act which set up the commission, I think there are lots of things that are missing in that act. And I think one mistake that was made in how the commission was constituted was, I think it should have been, the inquiry should have been led by a judge. This is just my thinking. Because if you have a judge leading the inquiry, I am sure most of the things that we lament on this platform, and I'm sure other Gambians lament as well, would not be happening, because a judge would not allow some of those things to happen. That's one thing. And secondly, I think the next issue is the individuals that are on the panel, especially the commissioners. One thing that surprises me is most of the individuals that are coming before the TRRC, for the most part, they're either civil servants, or they are military personnel, or police officers, or prison officers. But you can clearly see that on the panel of commissioners, there's no serving personnel there, or there's nobody on that panel who has an experience of service, whether it is in the Gambia or elsewhere. That should have been there. There is nobody on that panel who can be said to be an experienced civil servant. And watching the TRC and looking at some of the comments that some of the witnesses coming to the TRC have been coming up with, I just laugh because there are certain things, because things that the way the military operates, because in any whether it is the military or whether it is the police or whether it is the Gambia prison service, there's a chain of command. And the way that the workplace is run and the way that people interact is completely different to the way that people would interact in the civilian world. I was really struck when I think there was one witness that came to the TRC and said something like, I think the guy was a private soldier. The private soldier was saying that the head of the Gambia Armed Forces, Babukar Jatta, was scared of him. I was like, no, come on, that cannot be true, because that's just one example of things that are being said on the platform and things that happen there, which wouldn't otherwise happen if at all they had the right people in place. So I think the problem really, what we are seeing in the unfold in the TRRC, one of them clearly, Sana Sabali and Edward Singate, who both of whom are arch villains, coming together and being portrayed as if they are good people. So oh yes, let's just have a reconciliation between these two devils. It just makes a mockery of the process. I completely agree. But one thing I think that is a mistake in itself, because clearly I don't think it is right and proper for the TRRC itself to be organizing reconciliation sessions.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, I think because essentially what we are seeing them doing is they are preempting the result of their work. I think any reconciliation, I don't agree with reconciliation. I must say, I don't think there's anything to reconcile, because to say that reconciliation is to happen, it means you have two parties who have wronged each other.
Yeah.
Yes, because what we had in Rwanda was different. Because in Rwanda, you had culprits and victims on both sides. So because you had culprits and victims on both sides, it was mutually beneficial for there to be forgiveness for both sides to benefit. But in the case of the Gambia, you have culprits on one side and you have victims on one side. And bringing in reconciliation it's just insulting to the victims, because you are just forcing them to forgive, even though that is not their legitimate interest. Which is why I said that the National Assembly should bear some responsibility, because they were the ones who passed the bill into law, and this is something that they should have looked at. Because in the case of the Gambia, I don't think reconciliation should play any part. I think what should happen is we should have justice. There's no such thing as reconciliation in a situation whereby clearly somebody has gone out of their way to commit a crime, to hurt somebody, just because they feel that they can do it without any consequences happening. So I think that part has to be reconsidered. And also, just to buttress this point, I don't feel it is right for the TRRC to be hosting these reconciliation sessions, because that just preempts the result of their work. Because what should really happen is, at the end of their work, they should come up with a report, and that report should be accompanied by recommendations, and those recommendations should determine what should happen moving forward. But if they start, but once they start taking a position on these things, I think they have put off a lot of people, and even myself, I stopped watching it because of the same concerns that you raise on this panel, and I am sure most other Gambians have lamented as well. So there are clearly problems. But I hope that moving forward, they'll learn from some of these mistakes and avoid making a repetition.
I mean, I just want to chime in real quick. I don't even think there's nothing to learn from this at the end of the day, because we shouldn't set up conditions to begin with, period. I mean, they're just totally waste of money towards the next. I mean, for real. I mean, what happened in Rwanda, like you mentioned, that was a genocide. Almost 800,000 people were killed in several weeks, you know, and civilians were involved in the killing and all that stuff. What happened in Gambia is state-sanctioned killing.
That's right.
There is no reconciliation here. They're trying to reconcile. The state perpetuated the murders. They perpetuated the killing. It was state-sanctioned. So the state should bear responsibility for this. And in my eyes, I feel like that's why they set up the commission, because the state cannot persecute itself. Because what you have is that within this government itself, especially in the executive branch, what you have is that a lot of criminals are still there. A lot of these bad people are still there. So what's going to happen? Well, create a commission that fixes the problem. And by the time we get to the real stuff, the word salad and all that stuff, I mean, really, everybody forgot about really why do we even have this commission? At this point, if you ask many government why we even have a TRRC, none of people would even be able to tell you anymore. They know the personalities, it's good TV, but to what end? Why do we have a Justice Department? Really, the Justice Department should open investigations and prosecute these people wherever they have the evidence. We don't need a television, TV to bring people on screen or whatever to badger them because they're going to speak good English and that kind of crap. And for some reason, we call it good stuff. Give me a break. You know, we can do better. We should do better. But because it's state-sanctioned killing, what you have is because the state cannot prosecute itself. It really can't. I don't know many states that are actually capable of doing that, because at the end of the day, what you realize is that there are a lot of immoral people. There are a lot of immoral people that are part of this government. And I don't think the government is willing and ready to acknowledge the fact that some of it's, top people. I mean, literally look at the Johnny Commission. They only let some people, in their white people, whatever they call it, selective justice from being prosecuted or whatever, or from whatever, indemnify, whatever they call it in these legal terms, right? But again, what happened in Rwanda, what happened after the Holocaust, what happened in Srebrenica is very different from what happened in Banjo. Totally different. This is state-sanctioned killing, one-sided. One-sided. There was no civil war, none whatsoever. We have victims and we have criminals. And it didn't go the other way around. So there's nothing to reconcile. And transitional justice in Gambia, I'm really not sure how we're even going to achieve that at this point. We're almost 4 years into this government, and it seems like people have already moved on. And I don't think this government even want to shake the tables anymore, because if you go after those people, you're going after APRC. And it seems like he is actually hell-bent on actually having some kind of coalition with APRC. I mean, he's a politician. He has to do what he has to do to win. And if that means that this TV stuff is going to keep on going, making people forget that the reality that these people were actually cold-blooded murderers. No worry, we'll deal with it. Let's just push it to the margins.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Njie. Yes, that was a concern for me. It's also all very performative. You see, like, it was drama. It's just drama for people, really. They'll laugh at how somebody speaks. I'm like, this is serious matter. But then going back to us trying to copy what happens in other places, and you can see this TRRC, it's like they copy bits of South Africa, they copy bits of Bosnia Herzegovina, what you want to call it, they copy bits of, especially Rwanda, you see. But the realities are so different to ours. Like you said, I mean, you laid it out, and Mr. Sambou laid it out. We had institutions that criminalized, they brutalized, they murdered, they abused their own citizens. That is very different to Tutsi and Hutsis fighting each other, killing each other, or white South Africans and black South Africans, or the Muslims and the Christians in former Yugoslavia. So it's no parallel there. But then again, it all goes back to this, everything we do is symbolic, but it's not much substance to them. You can see that a lot in the Gambia. As a social commentator, you just watch them as somebody trained in social science. It's like, it's not dead to our people. It breaks my heart to say that, but our people are it's not dead to most of our people. It's in every institution, whether it's in our communities, whether it's government bodies, or even our own homes. The Gambia, I know, I'm not even 50 years old yet. Okay, but I've left there, you can say, coming to three decades now. But when I go back, the Gambia I see, and I speak to my wife, I'm like, maybe I'm getting old or something, but this place seems to be going backwards morally, you know? It's degenerated. It's like, it's really bad. The moral fabric of that country is broken, absolutely broken. Yeah. So anyway, this is about law and order and draft constitution and transitional justice. So my commentary on how I feel about the Gambia society, I think that's for another day. Mr. Sambou, the floor is yours.
Yes, so yes, I completely agree. There are lots of problems with the way this transitional justice is being pursued. But another thing that is going to be a problem is, I think Dr. Njie raised it, which is the issue of the politics of this of the whole thing, because I think we may find ourselves once again coming to the 11th hour realization that most of the things that we want to happen with regards to whatever it is that the TRRC is going to come up with in their report, President Barrow may be unwilling to do what is right or to do what has been recommended, just because whatever that is would not be something that um, that that aligns with what is his electoral interest or his political interest. Because clearly, the one single political party that clearly we all know would most definitely be in opposition with anything that is going to come up from the TRRC would be APRC, and it is public knowledge that that party obviously holds the biggest electoral capital that President Barrow needs to win. So I think we're going to have another 11-hour surprise, because we had it with the Janneh Commission. When the Janneh Commission made their recommendations, obviously he was very selective in how he implemented the recommendations, and clearly that was even a much smaller fish to fry compared to the TRRC. So I think it's just going, unfortunately, it's going to be another disappointment, which is where I agree with Dr. Njie that I think what should have happened was when Jammeh left, what should have happened was we should have had two justice departments. We should have kept, you have the mainstream justice department dealing with day-to-day justice issues. Then I think they should have set up a provisional justice department. Maybe they could call it the Department for Transitional Justice. And I think all these criminals could have been prosecuted, as opposed to setting up a commission, which clearly is going to take a very long time to get to the bottom of issues. And it is going to take 4 years to tell us something that we knew all along. So it's just sad that I kind of feel sorry for the victims. I think they are going to be the single biggest losers in this, and unfortunately, it's just sad that we found ourselves in this situation. So because after what happened during the past 22 years, I think it would have been very good for us to be in a position whereby we could have successful convictions, to set an example that such a thing cannot happen and it cannot go unpunished. But when, if at all that is that did not happen, then what's going to happen is, let's say in 10-15 years time to come, if at all we have somebody else who thinks that maybe they have the opportunity and means to do whatever it was that Jammeh did, and they end up in power, what is there to stop them doing what Jammeh did? They wouldn't, because all they'll be thinking is, oh, Gambians, then they go balance. So I just do whatever I want. Then after we can just reconcile. And I think that for me, really, that is I'm not somebody who believes in retribution and this this payback culture. I don't believe in that at all. But I think there has to be consequences, and people should understand that wrongdoing, if it happens or when it happens, if at all we can find who the culprit is, there has to be consequences. And the consequences do not just have to be something which would be pursued for the whole objective of inflicting pain or discomfort on the culprit, but it is good just to remind society that whenever things like this happen, consequences will follow, and that would serve as a deterrence. It disincentivizes wrongdoing. But once people do wrong and no consequences follow, then clearly there's nothing stopping other people from doing that. And I think that is one big mistake that we as a society would be making in not ensuring that the wrongs of the past 22 years are not pursued and are not prosecuted as they should be.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, we try to make this interactive. We go through people. They said thank you to you, Mr. Sambou. Yes, one Mr. Silla saying thank you, and then another Mr. Silla twice, and Mr. Baji. So yeah, thank you so much. Like them, I also follow you a lot, and I learn a lot from you. I think it's good. Your arguments are very cogent, and your arguments are. I mean, the only one I laughed about when you put what's it called? What's it called? I have to look at this again. I have look at when you had where is it again? Yeah, when he said democratic extermination, and he had Hitler, Mein Kampf, and Jim Crow laws. For that was hilarious. But apart from that, I'm like, yes, I like it. Yeah. I'm like, that's a bit extreme, but there you go. I do understand where you're coming from. Mr. Dr. Njie, if you want to chip in, normally we'll have stop, but I mean, we go 20 minutes now, long. We can go on up to 10 o'clock our time. I don't know if that's okay with you, Mr. Sambou. It's a Friday, obviously. But I mean, for Dr. Njie, is your time? It's a time difference. I don't know how you feel about it. I wouldn't like to hold you back any longer.
I'm 5 hours behind, so I'm good.
Oh, there you go then. Yeah. So the floor is yours. This is not justice. The bar association's concern that it's a threat. What's it called? It's threatened by the draft constitution not going to what do you call it? Not going to referendum. I didn't buy it. I wasn't convinced by it because I think, like I said, what's it called? The constitution is a framework and it's not set in stone, so it can be changed. Whatever is in there, would Yahya may use to indemnify whatever his folks are. I'm sure the lawyers in parliament, the parliamentarians, or they call them the Gambia National Assembly members, they have a legitimate right as people who they are representative of our people, of people who voted in there. I think they have a right to change that. So I don't think there should be a concern at all. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean the Constitution is not scripture, it's a living document, so we can always amend and change it. But getting back to what Paul Louis mentioned earlier about the whole notion of transitional justice and whatnot. If anything, I don't think anything is going to come out of it, honestly, with the TRRC. I really don't think so. I mean, think about it. Last year around this time, there was a petition going around that Sambou should run for president or something. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Just think about how insane that is. Right? Just think about how insane that is. But again, this is what happens when not the entire country are victims. We have to understand that too, right? There are a handful of victims in the Gambia. Again, we can say in a general sense, the Gambian population, they're all victims, right? To an extent. But that is a gross generalization as well, because there's a huge swath of the Gambia that supported Jammeh. Because we have to understand, Jammeh lost by 18,000 votes after the whole coalition and everything. He didn't steal any votes whatsoever. He got tons of votes. If it probably wasn't for Mama Kande, he probably would have won, right? And again, I'm just dabbling in some political analysis here, right? But this is what happens when you have few victims, and then you bring the criminals on TV, and then they start acting cute and looking cute, and then all of a sudden everything changes, and then the Gambian society are like, "What's the point?" And just like Palu, the Gambians don't think that you should punish people towards the next time. Really, I don't think so. Because usually people do some horrible things in society, like Balago, Abala, literally, because that's how Gambians think. right?
Live with God.
Court, right? You want to forgive everything. This is beyond like just locking somebody up or whatever. We have to set a precedent here, because what happened here in the in James Gambia, that should never happen again. But the problem with humans is that we're not good at learning from history. History is not there to for us to learn from or whatever. We use history for symbols, build monuments and whatnot and move on. Really, because we want to move on. We don't want to think about the trauma, right? We want to move on. So what you have here, I don't think that we're even going to end up having any kind of justice come out of it. I don't think so. I really don't, right? Because if it gets to Borough, what you're gonna have is electric judge. What if so? Let's say Borough, the document gets to me. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I don't want to do anything about it. Then what? Really? Then what? What's gonna happen? Because he has to win an election, and he has to pander to APRC. That's the only way he's gonna win. And APRC, there is no way in hell they're gonna support any PRRC recommendation that comes, because we know what we can preempt what's gonna come out of the TRRC, right? It's not gonna be super nice to APRC, the APRC government, right? But again, I really don't think anything is going to come out of it. And I'm not talking about legalist terms here again, because I'm a political scientist. I'm more of a social scientist, so I'm not going to get into the law. But I can talk about the political behavior and what we should expect from the administration in power. And I'm not trying to be a prophet. I'm not trying to prophesize anything. But based on what Barrow did with the Janet Commission, I really don't see how he's going to act any differently with the TRRC. I mean, I think because this is going to be more indicted, right? It's going to be a bigger one, right? And yeah, I mean, it's really not going to serve his interests. So why support it? There's no reason for it, because at the end of the day, he has to win the next election. He has to, and justice can only be served with the Justice Department. They don't need to wait for these people. They don't need to wait for the TRRC. They do not. They can literally start this now. Yeah, I mean, let them just conduct a basic investigation. What's the point of having a Justice Department? What's the point of it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Sambou, if you want to like to chip in, please.
Yes, but I think yes, what Dr. Njie said is spot on. But I think the problem that that we have right now is the person that's supposed to be initiating the wheels of justice with regards to the victims, or the person who should have initiated them, would have been a director of public prosecutions. And since Jame left, I don't think we've had one. We haven't had any DPP. So clearly, that was a responsibility that was under the office of the Attorney General, Batambedu at the time, who was a political appointee. And clearly, I don't know what conversations may have taken place between him and Adama Barrow at the time, but clearly, even him being in charge of such a thing would have been problematic, even if at all the justice route was taken as opposed to the TRRC. But now coming back to the TRRC, I think there is a fundamental problem here, which is that there's nothing within the TRRC Act which makes it a legal obligation for Barrow to implement the recommendations of the TRRC, which I think is a mistake.
Wow.
It is very similar to the draft constitution, because in the CRC Act, all it said was once the CRC presents their report and the final draft to the president should send it to the National Assembly, or should have it gazetted so that it can go to the National Assembly so that the legislative process can start. But then again, there was no legal obligation. So clearly, even with the draft constitution, Barrow could have sat on it however long he wanted, because there was nothing anybody could have done. They could go to court, yes, that's fine, but there's no legal mechanism that mandates him to move that on to the next stage. And that is the same issue that we find ourselves in again with the TRRC, because there is no legal obligation for Barrow to implement the recommendations of the TRRC. then it is going to be political discretion. And just like Dr. Njie has clearly said, he's very grounded in what he does, political science. No politician will take a course of action that will make them lose their job. Why would he do that? So it all comes down to this issue, which is why I'm saying I think it is a collective mistake, which in my view started with Bartambiri. Because all these things he should have made sure, not just him, but even with the National Assembly as well, they should have made sure that the TRRC Act itself was something that had everything in it that is supposed to have, which means whatever result that ends up coming out from the TRRC, there has to be a legal obligation for whoever it is that such a report is submitted to. There has to be a legal obligation for them to act on the report. But because there is no legal obligation, and Barrow has two options: you either make the political discretion to do what the TRRC recommends, which in my view would be what most Gambians would want, and morally speaking, that would be what is morally right, or do that and lose your job, or do the quite opposite, maybe piss off a lot of people, and maybe stand a chance of being re-elected. I think we can clearly predict how President Barrow is going to act, given the two scenarios. So I think that's a problem, which boils down to, I think, for everybody who's watching this, it all boils down to this: we have to make sure that the people that we vote for to represent us in the National Assembly are people who are capable of doing the job. Not just capable, but who have the will and the willingness to do what is right. But unfortunately, this is something that lacks in our National Assembly. So unfortunately, we're going to end up having pieces of legislation that are just legislation in name only, but they serve no purpose whatsoever, unfortunately.
But these people that represent us are not a deviation from the Gambian experience, then expression, a necessary one actually, right? So these people are not that divorced from the people they represent. They are not, right? They're as big as the people they represent. I'm sorry. They really don't know the issues for the most part. So that's why you can give them any commission and they will just go with it. I mean, really, how many of them have even read it? When they were creating this constitution. Really, I don't know. I don't trust any of those people. I really don't. And again, it really doesn't matter. They're going to vote for them again because really it's about the pulse of the person. We don't vote based on some idealistic notions of a better Gambia. Nobody does in Gambia. Few people do. And those people are attached to the video IS and they get what? So again, Gambians love the whole, name recognition and all that stuff. And the people that are representing them, honestly, they actually deserve them. We deserve every ounce of that. We deserve every ounce of the people who represent us in the parliament. Every single ounce of them. Because we are them and they are us. They are actually, it's a microcosm of the Gambia.
Yeah, you're very right. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Njie. I think that really sums the Gambia very, very well, very apt. Yeah, they are a reflection of ourselves. The people in the NAM, in the parliament, people you meet in official, even in the military or wherever, every sector of Gambian institution, we have an institutional decay. And I think it's been going on for a very, very long time. And instead of going back into the foundation to redig the foundation and set ourselves up, we just have these cosmetic changes constantly. Because I mean, if you look at Barrow's whole setup, really, 90% of them are just former Jambi people. So these are people who presided over institutional decay, very, very poor governance. They are still they are in positions of power, positions of influence. So why is it change? It's no change. So this is the problem we have. I think I'm got a major problem. Really, really. I don't know how we fix it, but maybe talking about it, probably that'll be a good start.
I mean, the Janet Commission literally called some of those people thieves. And
exactly.
So
exactly. So yeah. So it all goes about you political scientists. You probably got a better name for it, but it's all about political calculations. You can never get away from it. So Barrow, obviously, like you said, he wants to win. So he is going to do anything that he would like to do. So that's why we have to have a clear distinction between something that's moral and something that's legal. So we have to force them to act. Mrs. Sambou, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, for those of us, including those in the Gambian civil society who would like Barrow to implement or to act in accordance with the recommendations of the TRRC, they should not wait until that time comes. What they should be doing is they should start now. The thing is, I am not sure what the parliamentary procedures are for the National Assembly, but they should seriously start looking into the TRRC Act, and they should make sure that if at all this is something that can be pursued through a private member's proposal, I think they should be doing that. They should make sure that they seriously look at the TRRC Act and make sure that it is amended so that whatever result comes from the TRRC becomes a legal, becomes an issue that the president would have to implement as a matter of a legal obligation and not a discretion. If at all the law stays as it is, I think they should not be surprised that when the time comes, they can make all the noise that they want, or we can make all the noise that we want, but Barrow is not going to budge. He will not say anything, he will not do anything, and nothing will happen. Because clearly we are in what? Next year by this time, we have few months, if not weeks, before elections. So we should make anybody, including the Victim Center, I'm sure this is something that they would be very interested in. So they should really be speaking to the National Assembly to make sure that that act, the TRRC Act, is looked at carefully so that they make sure that there is a legal obligation. A legal obligation which is time-bound, not just an open-ended legal obligation. It has to be time-bound. Within X amount of weeks, you have to start implementing this. If you don't, you end up in the courts. Otherwise, Barrow will just do whatever Barrow wants.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Sambou. We got about 4 minutes now, so I'll probably give each of you to do closing statements, and then I think we can try and set another one up. I think this has been it's quite educative. I think we're doing like a public service. So I think we need to do this, whether it's on this platform or other platforms. But I think we need to discuss Gambia's social problems because there are so many. There are so many. So we need to have these discussions. And sometimes it's very easy to just like just want to give up. Really, sometimes like I'm never going back to that place because it is just horrendous. I mean, even the basics, the basic minimum standards that a country needs doesn't exist in our country. It's that bad. So anyway, I give the floor to Dr. Njie. If you can have what's it called, closing statements, please, and then we go back to Mr. Sambou, obviously. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this was good. Really, enjoyed it. For the first time seeing Palu in, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so. It's been a while, so it's good to link up. But yeah, I mean, from the Constitution, I mean, the draft Constitution, I feel like, you summed it well, Mr. Mane. You mentioned that how things are decayed in the Gambia and things are going backwards and whatnot. But I think an informed citizenry is necessary. And for me, the TRRC is not a silver bullet, but I feel like it can be a good catalyst to where we want to get to, right? The conversation, at least it's getting the conversation going. Let's keep it going, in that direction. If I can have TRRC every year, for without the $2 million, I'm good. I mean, dollars, yeah. I mean, I'll do it any day, right? But yeah, we have to understand why we vote for the people we vote for. We have to be. I think we're invested in the politics, but we're invested in the politics of patronage and identity politics. And our politics is not mature enough to get to that identity politics. I think the difference between the United States and Gambia is that the United States, at least for the first 100 years, regrettably, was run by just the elites. So they set up a very good system where uninformed people were not part of the system. Only informed citizens were part of that democratic process, right? Which was unfortunate, but it also allowed America to create a foundation, a core where they can actually build a political system where identity politics can be part of it, and really still it's not going to destroy the country. I mean, you have 4 years of Donald Trump. America is still standing. 4 years of Donald Trump in Gambia, probably, I mean, we're talking about the precipice, right? So again, you have to build institutions. They have to withstand. They have to, you have to build systems that are actually going to last. And we have to be honest with ourselves. Why are we voting for the people we vote for? Why do people support Barrow? Really, think about it. Just think about it. That guy shouldn't be running an ice cream stand, much less a country, right? Sure, his candidacy, yeah, it was thrust upon Gambians by UDP, obviously, because he came out of UDP, right? But the Gambians voted for him. But now, knowing what you know about Barrow, there is no reason why any serious Gambian should vote for him. But that doesn't matter. People are still going to vote for him in the thousands, right? So that tells you how our politics really needs a lot of maturity. We need a lot of learning. We need a lot of maturity in our politics. But I think we're getting there. I think we're getting somewhere. And that in and of itself is good. It's a good start. That we're even arguing about secularism. We're even arguing about the Constitution. 10 years ago, nobody would have cared. Jared Jammeh could have just come and created a new Constitution. Nobody will talk about it.
Yeah.
The fact that we are all vested, the fact that the incumbent is worried about losing an election, right? That is novel in Gambian politics. It's very novel. And I think we should take that as a win for democracy in and of itself. That the president is scared that he's going to lose the next election. The last 50 years, our presidents were so comfortable. They even think that the Jews actually vote for them. So the fact that the president is not even sure that he's going to win the next election, that is good. That is good. That our parliament, the people or the majority in the parliament are not the president's party. That also is good for the country. So you can see them. That's where you see the factions hit butt heads, right? That's where you see the politics actually come into fruition, the maturity in and of itself. But just because somebody voted one way or another doesn't mean that they're good or bad, or their interests. For some reason they voted against the national interest. National interest is always contested. Let's keep that in mind. It's always a contested space.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Njie. Mr. Sambou, if you would like to make some closing statements, please.
Yeah, sure. For me, really, moving forward, I hope things that have happened, especially with regards to the draft constitution, would have taught most of us Gambians that whenever issues of such importance are being considered, it is important to make sure that the conversation and the issues that are considered as part of the process are inclusive and they factor in and take into consideration our diverse people as opposed to just pandering or doing what the majority wants. Clearly, that does not always yield results, as we have clearly seen happen in the issue of in the case of the draft constitution, which I think moving forward we should just amend the existing 1997 constitution because it is amendable. And most of the bad things that are in the 1997 constitution we can amend, and most of the things that we feel and we believe should be there that are good that are not there, they can actually be put in there, and that can be, this is an exercise that can be done. In fact, some of the things that are in the draft constitution are which we think are good and are progressive, can form part of the package of provisions or the package of things that we want to add to the existing 1997 constitution. I hope moving forward, that issue of having a new constitution would not be reopened because one, it is too expensive, it is too divisive, and it does not do any favors to society whatsoever. So I think we have a we have a good constitution in my view, not very good, not as good as we would like. Obviously, there are lots of problems with the 1997 constitution, but these problems can be addressed in a way that society is not going to be divided along religious lines, because I think the conversations that revolved around the draft constitution, especially around the issue of religion and the issue of LGBT issues and things like that. I think they were very unhealthy. I am all for democracy, but I think once something that should be a national discourse has shifted from what the national interest is to what is the interest of my religion, or what is the interest of whatever ethno-linguistic or whatever identity group that I belong in, what is best for them. I think that clearly was an indication that the reset button was supposed to be, should have been pressed. And I am glad that the National Assembly pressed the reset button. In fact, I think they pressed the abort button, maybe for completely different reasons, but I think it was good. So personally, I hope that issue does not reopen itself, or nobody will reopen it. We should just move ahead and just amend the 1997 Constitution. That way, we address all the problems that most people think have been brought about by the failure of the draft constitution, and maybe for those people who feel that the failure of the draft constitution hampers transitional justice, hopefully those issues can also be addressed by amending the 1997 constitution. And with regards to the TRRC, I think it has gone too far for us to change anything now. But I think moving forward, I think people should really preempt what President Barrow is going to do. I am sure he's calculating this. So let's not, people should not underestimate him. I am sure he's anticipating the result of the TRRC, and he would take a view as to what his political interest is, and he would just do that. He wouldn't really care throwing anybody under the bus. So for the victims, the victim center, and for those of us who want to see the transitional justice aspect, which is part of what the TRRC is doing, those of us who want that to be followed through, we should really be looking at the TRRC Act very carefully and make sure that it is amended so that there is going to be a time-bound legal obligation for the president to act on the TRRC report. Otherwise, it's just going to end up just like the Ghana Commission. But Dave, thank you very much for having me on this platform, and my good friend Dr. Njie, it was very good after so many years.
Yeah, good seeing you, man.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that Gunjur Online was a medium to reconnect old friends and old friendships. And I think we need to keep this conversation going, whether it's on this platform or other platforms, between 2 Gambians, 3 Gambians, 4 Gambians. I think we have our work cut out, but I'm very, very sure that we can do it. It's just with a change of mindset. But we have to start from the very bottom. We don't have a foundation. So I think that's what should be Gambia's major response. That should be our major priority. And then I would just like to close on to say that I thank you, my guests here, my brothers. I'm very happy that you came. We hope in other people who have opposing views to this, proponents of the draft constitution can also come. I mean, Mr. Sambou was kind enough to provide some names of other people who I will reach out to. I'll extend the invitation to them. They could also come maybe next Friday or another time. But I think we need to keep this conversation going. So anytime any of you feel like coming, you would like to speak to Gambians, please come over. We'll do it. If Friday is better for Mr. Sambou, obviously, we can do it. But I would like to tell Gambians, let's keep talking. Let's keep talking. We have a lot of work to do. Good night, everybody. Thanks to our listeners, to our viewers, and people who follow us on social media and everywhere else. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.